The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Briar Kate's tear-streaked face as the wagon rattled along the dusty trail, her wrists raw from the coarse rope binding them together. Her fate sealed by her father's gambling debts to one of the most feared men in the Colorado Territory. It was June of 1871 when Briar's life changed forever. At 20 years old, she had been raised on her father's modest homestead outside of Silver Creek, a growing frontier town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Her mother had passed when she was 12, leaving Briar to tend the house and care for her father, a man whose grief had driven him to cards and whiskey. She had known for years that Richard Kate was not a good gambler, but she never imagined he would sink so low as to wager his only daughter in a desperate attempt to clear his debts. Yet here she was, property of Vern Holcroft, a cattle baron with a reputation for cruelty that extended across 3 territories. "You'll learn to appreciate your new situation," Holcroft said, his voice as dry and unforgiving as the landscape around them. He was 45, with hard, angular features and cold eyes that reminded Briar of a rattlesnake. "A woman needs a strong hand to guide her. Your father was too soft." Briar bit her tongue until she tasted blood. She had already learned the cost of talking back when Holcroft had struck her across the face before they'd even left the town limits. The bruise still throbbed on her cheekbone, a painful reminder of her new reality. Holcroft's ranch, the Double H, sprawled across thousands of acres of prime grazing land. As they approached, Briar saw a dozen cowboys working the property, moving cattle and mending fences. None of them looked at the wagon as it passed, though Briar felt their curiosity like a physical weight. "Your quarters are in the main house," Holcroft informed her as the wagon pulled up to an imposing 2-story structure built of thick timber. "You'll be expected to keep house, cook meals, and attend to my needs. Do as you're told and we'll get along fine." The way he said "needs" made Briar's skin crawl. She was hustled inside by Holcroft's housekeeper, a tight-lipped woman named Mrs. Oates who barely spoke as she showed Briar to a small room off the kitchen. "He'll expect you ready for dinner in an hour, Mrs." Oates said, finally cutting the ropes from Briar's wrists. "There's a dress in the wardrobe. Make yourself presentable." She closed the door firmly, though Briar noted there was no lock. She wasn't trusted enough to be locked in, but where could she run to in this vast, unforgiving country? Briar slumped onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to weep properly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had been sold like livestock, with no more say in her fate than the cattle in Holcroft's fields. The enormity of her situation crashed over her in waves until exhaustion claimed her. She woke to Mrs. Oates shaking her roughly. "Get up, girl. He's waiting, and he doesn't like to wait." Hastily, Briar changed into the offered dress, a garment finer than any she had owned but chosen for Holcroft's pleasure, not hers. She splashed water on her face from the basin provided and attempted to smooth her long auburn hair. Dinner was a tense affair, with Holcroft watching her every move while he spoke of his plans for expanding his empire. 2 ranch hands joined them: the foreman, a grizzled man named Beck, and Holcroft's right-hand man, a cold-eyed enforcer called Jared who looked at Briar with undisguised interest that made her feel unclean. "Your father owed me a considerable sum," Holcroft said as they ate. "Taking you as payment was a kindness on my part. I could have had him imprisoned or worse." "How much did he owe?" Briar asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than you're worth," Holcroft replied with a humorless laugh. "But I've been looking for a woman to grace my home." "You'll do with some training." Days passed in a haze of drudgery and fear. Briar worked from dawn till dusk, cooking, cleaning, and avoiding Holcroft's wandering hands whenever possible. At night, she barricaded her door with a chair, though she knew it was only a matter of time before he demanded more from her. The other ranch hands kept their distance, following their boss's unspoken claim. 2 weeks into her captivity, Briar was hanging laundry in the yard when she first saw him, a tall, lean cowboy riding up to the ranch on a magnificent black stallion. Unlike the other hands, he sat straight in the saddle with an air of quiet confidence. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jawline covered in a few days' worth of stubble. "That's Isaac Garrett," Mrs. Oates said, appearing at Briar's side. "New hire. Been working the high country bringing down the herds from summer pasture." The older woman gave Briar a sharp look. "Don't get any ideas. The boss doesn't share what's his." Briar flushed and returned to her work, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the newcomer as he dismounted and led his horse toward the stables. There was something different about him, something in the way he carried himself that spoke of a man who made his own rules. Later that evening, as Briar served dinner, she got a better look at Isaac. He was handsome, with clear blue eyes that held a quiet intensity and sun-bronzed skin. He couldn't be much older than 25, but there was a weathered quality to him that suggested he'd seen more of life than most men his age. "Garrett," Holcroft acknowledged him with a nod. "Beck tells me you've got a good eye for horseflesh." "I've been around them all my life, sir," Isaac replied, his voice a pleasant baritone with a slight Texas drawl. "Good. I've got new stock coming in next week. I want you to look them over before I finalize the purchase." Throughout the meal, Briar noticed that Isaac never once looked directly at her, yet she had the distinct feeling he was aware of her every movement. When his hand brushed hers as she poured coffee, she felt a jolt of awareness that made her nearly drop the pot. "Careful, girl," Holcroft snapped. "That pot costs more than you do." The men laughed, all except Isaac, who fixed his gaze on his plate. That night, Briar dreamed of escape, of riding away on Isaac's black stallion, the wind in her hair and freedom ahead. She woke to the harsh reality of her small room and the sound of Holcroft's heavy footsteps in the hall. Over the next few days, Briar found herself inventing reasons to visit the stables or the corral when she knew Isaac would be working there. He was unfailingly polite, tipping his hat and calling her Miss Kate, never Briar like the other hands who sought to emphasize her lack of status. One afternoon, as she was fetching water from the well, Isaac approached leading 2 horses. "Afternoon, Miss Kate," he said, removing his hat. Up close, she could see his eyes were the color of a summer sky. "Mr. Garrett," she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please call me Isaac." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to say, I hope you're being treated well." The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure. "As well as can be expected for property," she replied bitterly. Isaac's jaw tightened. "No person should be another's property, not in this country. Tell that to Mr. Holcroft." "Some men mistake power for right," Isaac said quietly. "Doesn't make them correct." Before Briar could respond, Jared appeared around the corner of the barn. "Getting friendly with the boss's woman, Garrett?" he called, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. "Just being neighborly," Isaac replied evenly, settling his hat back on his head. "Good day, Miss Kate." As he led the horses away, Briar felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in weeks' hope. The next day brought a thunderstorm, trapping Briar inside the house. She was polishing silver in the dining room when Holcroft entered, smelling of whiskey despite the early hour. "You've been talking to Garrett," he said without preamble. Briar's heart raced. "Only in passing, sir, when my chores take me outside." Holcroft moved closer, backing her against the sideboard. "You belong to me, girl. Don't forget that. I paid good money to clear your father's debts." "I never agreed to be sold," Briar said, surprising herself with her boldness. The slap came swiftly, knocking her head to the side. "Your agreement wasn't required," Holcroft snarled. "Your father made the deal and I honored it. You do well to show some gratitude." Briar clutched her burning cheek, tears welling in her eyes. "Tonight you'll move your things to my room," Holcroft continued, his voice dangerously soft. "I've been patient, but my patience has limits." After he left, Briar slid to the floor, her legs too weak to hold her. The thought of sharing Holcroft's bed made her physically ill. She had to escape tonight before he could claim what he believed was rightfully his. The storm intensified as evening approached. Under cover of darkness and thunder, Briar gathered what few possessions she had and slipped out through the kitchen door while Mrs. Oates was busy in the pantry. The rain soaked her immediately, but she welcomed it, hoping it would mask her scent and wash away her tracks. She had no clear plan beyond reaching the small creek that ran along the property's edge, following it downstream to where it eventually passed near the town of Silver Creek. It was foolish to attempt such a journey on foot in this weather, but desperation drove her forward. Briar had barely reached the edge of the paddock when a hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled wildly until a familiar voice spoke in her ear. "Easy, Miss Kate, it's Isaac." He released her and she spun to face him, rain streaming down both their faces. "What are you doing out here?" she demanded, clutching her small bundle of belongings. "Same as you, I reckon," he replied. "Leaving, though I planned a bit better." He gestured toward the stables where she could make out the silhouette of his saddled horse. "You're escaping, too?" "I was hired to find you," Isaac admitted. "Your cousin Ellie has been searching for you since your father sold you. She hired me in Denver last month." Briar stared at him in shock. "Ellie, but she moved to Boston years ago," she returned when she heard your father was in trouble. "By the time she reached Silver Creek, the deal was done and you were gone. It took us time to track Holcroft down." A mixture of relief and suspicion washed over Briar. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I needed to assess the situation, make sure I could get you out safely. Holcroft has too many men who are loyal to him and his money. I couldn't risk tipping my hand." Isaac's expression turned urgent. "We need to go now. I heard Holcroft's plans for tonight." The mention of Holcroft's intentions steeled Briar's resolve. "Lead the way." They moved quickly to the stables, where Isaac helped her mount before swinging up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was both comforting and disquieting in its unfamiliarity. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were off, the horse picking its way carefully through the rain-slicked yard before breaking into a gallop once they reached open ground. Briar expected to hear shouts of alarm, gunshots, the sounds of pursuit, but there was only the drumming of hooves, the patter of rain, and the occasional rumble of thunder. The storm was their ally, covering their escape as they rode through the night. They rode for hours, the rain eventually giving way to a damp, misty dawn. Isaac guided the horse with confidence through terrain that all looked the same to Briar's untrained eye. When they finally stopped to rest by a small stream, Briar's muscles screamed in protest as Isaac helped her dismount. "Where are we going?" she asked, stretching her stiff limbs. "I have a cabin about a day's ride from here," Isaac replied, unsaddling his horse to let it rest. "It's remote, hard to find unless you know what you're looking for. We can lay low there while we figure out our next move." "And what is our next move? Holcroft won't just let me go." "No, he won't," Isaac agreed grimly. "Men like him consider it a matter of pride, but your cousin has connections in Denver. Once we reach my cabin, I'll ride to the nearest town and send word that I've found you, then we wait for help." Briar sat on a fallen log, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past day of the past weeks. "Why would you risk this for me? For a stranger?" Isaac crouched beside the stream, filling his canteen. "I've spent my life trying to right wrongs where I find them." "What happened to you is wrong by any measure." He passed her the canteen. "Besides, your cousin's paying me well." The slight smile that accompanied his words told Briar he was trying to lighten the mood, but she sensed there was more to his motivation than money or morality. After a brief rest, they continued their journey, staying off the main trails and keeping to the cover of trees and gullies wherever possible. Isaac proved to be a skilled tracker and woodsman, pointing out signs of wildlife and teaching Briar how to move quietly through the underbrush. "Were you a scout in the war?" she asked as they paused to water the horse again in the late afternoon. "Army Ranger," Isaac confirmed. "Served under General Sherman, not my proudest years, but I learned skills that have served me well since." "How did you end up working for my cousin?" I've made a name for myself finding people who don't want to be found or who are being kept by those who have no right to them." There was a hardness in his voice that suggested personal experience. "Your cousin heard of me through a friend whose sister I helped escape an abusive husband last year." They reached Isaac's cabin as the sun was setting, a simple but sturdy structure nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. Inside was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. "It's not much," Isaac apologized, lighting a lamp, "but it's secure. No one comes up this way except the occasional trapper." "It's perfect," Briar assured him, relief washing over her at being somewhere Holcroft couldn't reach her. Isaac built a fire while Briar took stock of the cabin's provisions. There was jerky, beans, coffee, flour, and other staples enough to last them several days if they were careful. "I'll sleep outside," Isaac said, nodding toward the lean-to visible through the window. "Give you some privacy." "You don't have to do that," Briar protested, feeling guilty at taking his bed. "I insist. I've slept under worse conditions." His expression softened. "You're safe here, Miss Kate. Try to get some rest." That night, Briar slept better than she had since being taken from her home, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The knowledge that Isaac was nearby keeping watch gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt in weeks. She woke to the smell of coffee and found Isaac at the stove, frying salt pork and heating beans. "Hope you're hungry," he said, glancing up with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Starving," she admitted, realizing it was true. For the first time since her ordeal began, her appetite had returned. Over breakfast, Isaac outlined his plan. "I'll ride to Clearwater today. It's about 4 hours west. They've got a telegraph office there. I can send word to your cousin and be back before dark." "What if Holcroft's men are looking for us?" "They likely are, but they'll expect us to head east, back toward Silver Creek. Clearwater's in the opposite direction. Still, I'll be careful." He hesitated. "Will you be all right here alone?" Briar nodded, though the thought of being alone made her nervous. "I'll be fine. I've got plenty to keep me busy." She gestured at the cabin, which could use a woman's touch. "There's a rifle above the door," Isaac said, pointing. "Do you know how to use one? My father taught me the basics." "Good. I don't expect trouble, but better safe than sorry." After Isaac left, Briar set about making the cabin more habitable. She swept the floor, washed the few dishes, and aired out the bedding in the sunshine. The physical work felt good after days of tension and fear. By mid-afternoon, she had the place looking much more comfortable, and had even managed to gather some wild onions and herbs growing near the cabin to supplement their dinner. She was sitting on the front step, enjoying the peaceful sounds of the forest, when she heard a twig snap in the nearby trees. Briar froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she stood and backed toward the door, remembering the rifle Isaac had mentioned. Before she could reach it, a man emerged from the trees, not Isaac, but a stranger in trail-worn clothes with a week's worth of beard on his weathered face. "Well now, what have we here?" the man said, grinning to reveal tobacco-stained teeth. "Pretty little thing like you all alone in these woods." Briar's hand found the door handle behind her. "My husband will be back any minute," she lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's just checking his trap lines." The man chuckled. "That's so funny. I've been watching this cabin for a spell, and I only saw one feller ride out this morning." He took a step closer. "And I'm betting he won't be back for hours yet." Briar darted inside and lunged for the rifle, but the man was quick despite his rangy frame. He shoved through the door after her and caught her wrist just as her fingers brushed the weapon. "Now that's not neighborly," he said, twisting her arm until she cried out in pain. "I'm just looking for some company is all." "Let me go," Briar struggled, kicking at his shins and clawing at his face with her free hand. The man cursed and backhanded her hard enough to send her sprawling onto the floor. "Got some fight in you, I like that," he growled, advancing on her. "But you'll learn some manners before I'm done." As he reached for her, the cabin door burst open again and Isaac stood silhouetted in the doorway, his revolver already drawn. "Step away from her," he commanded, his voice colder than Briar had ever heard it. The intruder spun, reaching for his own weapon, but Isaac was faster. A single shot rang out, and the man crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. "You shot me," he gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. "Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder," Isaac replied, crossing the room in quick strides to kick the man's gun away. He knelt beside Briar. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her cheek throbbed where she'd been struck. "I'm all right. How did you know to come back?" "I didn't make it to Clearwater. About an hour out, I spotted tracks following ours from earlier. I doubled back to make sure you were safe." Isaac helped her to her feet before turning his attention back to the wounded intruder. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "Name's Lyle Moss," the man ground out, his face pale from pain and blood loss. "I'm a bounty hunter." Holcroft's offering $500 for the return of his property. He jerked his chin toward Briar. "Plus another $500 for the man who took her." Briar felt ill hearing herself described as property once again, but Isaac's hand on her arm steadied her. "Holcroft moved fast," Isaac muttered. "We need to change our plans." He addressed Moss again. "How many others know about this cabin?" "Just me, far as I know," Moss replied, grimacing. "Found it by accident while tracking you. Recognized your horse's shoe print, got a distinctive chip in the left front." Isaac's expression was grim as he bound Moss's wound with strips torn from a spare shirt. "We'll need to move tonight," he told Briar. "If one bounty hunter found us, others might too. We can't wait for your cousin's help." "Where will we go?" Briar asked, already gathering their few belongings. "North, into the high country. I know places up there where we can hide until it's safe." Isaac secured Moss to a chair with rope from his saddlebags. "He'll live, but we can't take him with us, and I won't leave a wounded man to die, no matter what he intended. Someone will find him here. Trappers use this cabin when I'm not around. Someone will be along in a day or two." Isaac finished tying the final knot, ignoring Moss's curses. "We need to move quickly." Within half an hour, they were ready to depart. Isaac had changed his horse's shoes to disguise their tracks and packed what supplies they could carry. As they prepared to leave, Briar took one last look at the cabin that had briefly been their sanctuary. "It feels like I've been running my whole life," she said softly. "First from poverty after my mother died, then from my father's creditors, now from Holcroft." Isaac adjusted the saddle bags before helping her mount. "Sometimes running is the only way to stay alive," he replied. "But sooner or later, we all have to make a stand." They rode through the night, Isaac leading them along game trails and creek beds to mask their trail. By dawn, they had climbed high enough that Briar could look back and see the vast expanse of territory they had covered, the land spreading out below them like a patchwork quilt of forests, meadows, and rocky outcroppings. "It's beautiful," she breathed, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in gold and amber. "Yes, it is," Isaac agreed, but when Briar glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the view. She blushed and turned away, confused by the feelings his gaze stirred within her. They made camp in a small cave Isaac knew of, hidden behind a waterfall that tumbled down the mountainside. The constant rush of water would mask any sounds they made and hide the smoke from their small fire. "We'll rest here today and continue at nightfall," Isaac decided, unsaddling his weary horse. "Less chance of being spotted that way." As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Briar studied Isaac's profile in the firelight. "You never told me how you ended up working as a ranch hand for Holcroft." Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "Your cousin had a general idea of where Holcroft had taken you, but not the exact location. I tracked him to his ranch and hired on, figuring it was the best way to assess the situation and find you." "You risked a lot," Briar observed. "Holcroft is not a forgiving man." "No, he's not," Isaac agreed grimly. "Men like Holcroft believe their wealth gives them the right to take whatever or whoever they want. I've seen his kind before." There was something in his tone that made Briar wonder about his past. Is that why you do this work, finding people who are lost or taken?" Isaac was silent for a long moment before answering. "My sister was taken when she was 16. A man passing through our town in Texas promised her work in a fine house in San Antonio. By the time my parents realized she was gone, it was too late." His jaw tightened. "I spent 3 years searching for her, only to find her grave in a small town in New Mexico. The fine house turned out to be a brothel, and she died of consumption before I could save her." "I'm so sorry," Briar whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. Isaac's fingers curled around hers briefly before he pulled away. "After that, I decided to use what I'd learned to help others, to make sure no other family went through what mine did if I could prevent it." His story gave Briar a new understanding of why he had been so determined to help her. It wasn't just about the money her cousin had promised. It was personal redemption for the sister he couldn't save. As the day wore on, they took turns keeping watch while the other rested. The close quarters of the cave meant they were never far apart, and Briar became increasingly aware of Isaac's presence, the sound of his breathing, the scent of leather and pine that clung to him, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. By nightfall, they were ready to move again. Isaac had studied the terrain carefully and plotted a route that would take them to an abandoned mining camp he knew of, where they could rest more comfortably for a few days while deciding their next move. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when the sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. Isaac immediately guided them off the trail and into a dense thicket of pines. "How many?" Briar whispered as they dismounted and Isaac tied their horse to a low branch. "Hard to tell." "At least 3, maybe more." He drew his revolver and checked that it was fully loaded. "Stay here, I'm going to scout ahead." "Be careful," Briar urged, fear clutching at her heart. Isaac nodded and melted into the darkness with a stealth that spoke of his years as a ranger. Briar waited, straining her ears for any sound above the gentle sighing of the wind through the pines and the occasional hoot of a night owl. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Just as Briar was considering going to look for Isaac, he reappeared as silently as he had vanished. 5 riders, he reported, crouching beside her. "Holcroft's men, including Jared, they're combing the area systematically." His expression was grim. "They've got dogs." Briar's blood ran cold. Dogs could track them no matter how carefully they concealed their trail. "What do we do?" "We need to split up," Isaac decided after a moment of thought. "The dogs will follow your scent more easily since you've been at the ranch longer. I'll create a false trail to draw them off while you continue north." "No," Briar protested. "I can't go alone." "I don't know these mountains like you do." "You won't be alone for long," Isaac assured her. "Follow the stream we crossed earlier. It leads to the mining camp I told you about. I'll meet you there by tomorrow night. And if you don't come," Briar couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Isaac's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I'll come, I promise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folding knife. "Take this, just in case." Briar accepted the knife, their fingers brushing in the darkness. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. Even in the dim light, she could see the surprise on Isaac's face, followed by something warmer before he masked it with determination. "Head north and stick to the water when you can. It'll mask your scent. I'll draw them east and circle back when I've lost them." With that, he was gone again, taking their horse with him to create a more convincing trail. Briar watched him disappear into the darkness, touching her fingers to her lips as she realized how much she had come to depend on him to trust him in such a short time. Gathering her courage, she began making her way north as instructed, moving as quietly as she could through the underbrush. The night was clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Briar found the stream Isaac had mentioned and waded into its icy waters, gasping at the cold but determined to follow his instructions. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when she heard the baying of hounds in the distance, coming from the east where Isaac had gone to create his diversion. Briar increased her pace, fighting panic as she imagined Isaac confronted by Holcroft's men and their dogs. The stream led her into a narrow canyon where the water ran deeper and faster. Briar stayed in the water as long as she could, but eventually the current became too strong, forcing her onto the rocky bank. Her clothes were soaked, and the night air was cold enough to make her shiver uncontrollably. As dawn broke, Briar found herself in a small valley dotted with the remains of crude structures the abandoned mining camp Isaac had described. Most of the buildings had collapsed, but one small cabin still stood, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. Inside, Briar found an old iron stove, a broken table, and a moldering pallet in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. She gathered what dry wood she could find and managed to start a small fire in the stove to dry her clothes and warm her chilled body. As the day wore on, Briar tried to keep busy to distract herself from worry about Isaac. She cleaned the cabin as best she could, found some wild onions and berries growing nearby, and gathered more wood for the fire. But as evening approached with no sign of him, her anxiety grew. What if Holcroft's men had caught him? What if he was wounded or worse? The thought of Isaac injured or killed because of her made Briar physically ill. Night fell, and still Isaac did not come. Briar sat by the stove, watching the flames dance through the cracks in the iron, jumping at every sound from outside. She had just decided to try to sleep when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. Heart pounding, Briar reached for the knife Isaac had given her and moved to the side of the door, ready to defend herself if necessary. The footsteps stopped just outside, and then a familiar voice called softly, "Briar, are you in there? Isaac." She flung open the door to find him standing there, his clothes torn and dirty, a bloody gash on his forehead, but very much alive. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms. Isaac stiffened in surprise before his arms came around her, holding her tightly against his chest. "I told you I'd come," he murmured into her hair. Briar pulled back, suddenly aware of her forward behavior but couldn't bring herself to fully release him. "You're hurt," she said, touching the edge of the wound on his forehead. "It's nothing," Isaac assured her, though he winced when her fingers came near the cut. "Brushed too close to a tree branch while riding fast." "Did you lose them?" Briar asked, finally stepping back to let him enter the cabin. For now. Isaac sank wearily onto a crate near the stove, the firelight revealing more bruises and scrapes than just the one on his head. "I led them on a wild chase for miles before doubling back. Lost our horse in the process, though. Had to finish on foot." Briar fetched the cleanest cloth she could find and the canteen of water she'd filled earlier. "Let me clean that cut at least." Isaac submitted to her ministrations with only minimal protest, his eyes never leaving her face as she gently cleaned the dirt and dried blood from his wound. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father came home injured often enough," Briar replied, focusing on her task to avoid thinking about how close they were sitting or how her heart raced whenever their eyes met. "Usually from bar fights or falling from his horse while drunk." "He doesn't deserve a daughter like you," Isaac said quietly, Briar's hands stilled. "No, he doesn't, but he's still my father." "Would you go back to him? If you could," the question took Briar by surprise. She hadn't thought about what would happen after they escaped Holcroft for good. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing for me at the homestead anymore. My father sold everything of value, including me." "Your cousin would welcome you in Denver," Isaac suggested. "From what she told me, she has a good life there. Her husband owns a successful mercantile." "Perhaps," Briar agreed, though the thought of living as her cousin's charity case held little appeal. She finished cleaning Isaac's wound and sat back. "What about you? What will you do once this is over?" Isaac shrugged. "Move on to the next job, I suppose. There's always someone needing help." The thought of him leaving made Briar's chest ache in a way she wasn't prepared for. She busied herself putting away the medical supplies to hide her reaction. "You should rest. I'll keep watch for a while." "We're both exhausted," Isaac countered. "I think we can risk a few hours' sleep." The trail here is hard to follow, and they were headed in the wrong direction when I last saw them. They arranged their meager bedding on opposite sides of the small cabin, but despite her exhaustion, Briar found sleep elusive. She was acutely aware of Isaac's presence just a few feet away, his steady breathing both comforting and distracting. "Isaac," she whispered after a long silence, "are you awake?" "Yes," came his immediate reply. "Thank you for everything, for risking your life to help me." There was a rustle as he shifted position. "You don't need to thank me, Briar, I'm just doing what's right." "Is that all it is? Doing what's right?" The darkness gave her courage to ask what she might never have said in daylight, another pause, longer this time. "No," he finally admitted, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "That's not all it is." Briar's heart skipped a beat, but before she could respond, Isaac continued, "But it doesn't matter what I feel. Once this is over, you'll go to your cousin, start a new life. You deserve that chance." "What if that's not what I want?" Briar challenged, sitting up in the darkness. "What do you want, Briar?" Isaac's voice was gentle but serious. She took a deep breath. "I want to be free, to make my own choices about my life. And I want," she faltered, then forced herself to continue. "I want to know if what I'm feeling for you is real or just gratitude for being rescued." She heard him move, and then he was sitting beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "What are you feeling?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his question that made her heart ache. "I'm not sure I know how to describe it," Briar admitted. "When I'm with you, I feel safe but also alive, like I'm finally seeing the world clearly for the first time." Isaac's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and calloused as they entwined with her own. "I told myself I wouldn't do this," he murmured, "that it wouldn't be right given the circumstances." "Do what?" Briar asked, her pulse quickening. "This," Isaac said, and then he was kissing her, his lips gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded. Briar had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling encounters with boys from neighboring farms, but nothing like this. This was a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to ask for it without words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you hanging laundry in Holcroft's yard," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Briar asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because you weren't free to choose. You still aren't, not really, not while Holcroft is hunting us." The reminder of their precarious situation was like a bucket of cold water. Briar reluctantly pulled back. "You're right. We need to focus on staying alive." Isaac caught her hand before she could move away completely. "But when this is over, when you are truly free, I want you to know that I'll be there if you want me." "I will want you," Briar assured him, squeezing his hand before retreating to her own bedding. "Get some rest. We both need it." This time, despite the turmoil of emotions swirling within her, Briar fell asleep quickly, comforted by Isaac's presence and the promise of a future that suddenly seemed possible. They were awakened at dawn by the distant but unmistakable sound of barking dogs. "They found our trail," Isaac said grimly, already on his feet and gathering their few possessions. "We need to move now." "Where can we go without horses?" Briar asked, fear tightening her throat. "There's an old Ute trail that leads over the ridge to the north. It's rough going, but it might be our only chance." Isaac handed her the canteen. "Take as much water as you can carry. It's going to be a hard climb." They left the cabin, moving as quickly as possible through the underbrush toward the steep ridge that loomed above the mining camp. The baying of the hounds was growing louder, spurring them to greater speed despite the difficult terrain. The trail Isaac had mentioned was barely visible, a narrow track worn into the rock by generations of native feet. It zigzagged up the face of the ridge, exposed in places to sheer drops that made Briar dizzy to look at. "Don't look down," Isaac advised, leading the way. "Just focus on where you're placing your feet." They climbed for what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit fading and then returning as the wind shifted. By mid-morning, they had reached a narrow ledge about 2/3 of the way up the ridge. Below them, they could see figures moving through the trees near the mining camp. Holcroft's men spreading out to search the area. "They'll find our trail soon," Isaac said, his expression grim. "We need to keep moving." As they continued their ascent, the trail became even more treacherous, narrowing to barely the width of a foot in places. Briar pressed herself against the rock face, trying not to think about the drop to her right. They had almost reached the top of the ridge when disaster struck. A section of the trail, weakened by recent rains, crumbled beneath Briar's feet. She screamed as she began to slide, scrabbling desperately for purchase on the loose rock. Isaac's hand shot out, catching her wrist in an iron grip just before she would have fallen. For a heart-stopping moment, they both teetered on the edge, and then Isaac braced himself and pulled, using all his strength to haul Briar back onto solid ground. They collapsed together on the narrow trail, breathing hard, Briar trembling with the shock of her near fall. Isaac held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "You didn't," Briar assured him, clinging to him just as fiercely. "I'm still here." The moment was shattered by a shout from below. One of Holcroft's men had spotted them on the ridge. Even from this distance, Briar could see him pointing upward, alerting the others. "They've seen us," Isaac said unnecessarily, helping Briar to her feet. "Come on, we're almost to the top." With renewed urgency, they completed their climb, reaching the crest of the ridge just as the first shots rang out, bullets whining past them and chipping the rocks at their feet. The other side of the ridge descended more gradually into a heavily forested valley. As they plunged into the cover of the trees, Isaac suddenly stopped, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What is it?" Briar asked, looking back nervously. "I know where we are," Isaac replied, a slow smile spreading across his face, "and I know someone who might help us." He pointed to a thin trail of smoke rising from the trees about a mile away. "There's a settlement down there, a small community of freed slaves and deserters from both sides of the war. They keep to themselves, don't bother with the law or anyone else's business. Will they welcome strangers?" Briar asked doubtfully. "They might welcome me," Isaac said. "I helped their leader, a man named Josiah, escape from a bounty hunter a few years back. If he's still there, he owes me a favor." It was a thin hope, but better than none. They made their way down the slope as quickly as caution allowed, hearing the occasional shout behind them as their pursuers reached the top of the ridge. The settlement consisted of a dozen or so rough cabins arranged in a loose circle around a central clearing. As Isaac and Briar approached, they were met by several men armed with rifles and suspicious expressions. "We're looking for Josiah," Isaac called, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "Tell him Isaac Garrett is here to collect on an old debt." One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered black man with graying hair at his temples, stepped forward to examine them more closely. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Isaac Garrett," he said, lowering his rifle. "Never thought to see you in these parts again." "Hello, Josiah," Isaac replied with a relieved smile. "We're in trouble and need your help." Josiah glanced at Briar, then at the ridge behind them. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind with guns and dogs," Isaac replied grimly. 5 men, maybe more by now, they're after the lady." Josiah considered this for a moment before nodding decisively. "Bring them inside," he ordered his men, "and send someone to watch the trail. I want to know when these pursuers reach our valley." They were ushered into the largest cabin, which served as a communal gathering place. Inside, several women were preparing a meal while children played in one corner. All activity ceased when they entered, curious eyes turning to examine the strangers. "This is Briar Kate," Isaac introduced her. "She was unlawfully taken by a man named Holcroft to settle her father's gambling debts. I was hired to find her and bring her to safety. And now Holcroft wants his property back," Josiah surmised, his tone making it clear what he thought of such a claim. "Yes," Briar confirmed, lifting her chin. "I am not going back to him. I'd rather die." Josiah's expression softened as he looked at her. No one here will force you to go anywhere you don't want to, Miss Kate. We understand better than most what it means to be treated as property. One of the women approached, offering Briar a cup of water and a sympathetic smile. You're safe here, honey. These men may not look like much, but they know how to protect their own. Thank you, Briar said, gratefully accepting the water, but I don't want to bring trouble to your community. Trouble finds us whether we look for it or not, Josiah replied philosophically. The question is, what do we do about it? He turned to Isaac. How many men did you say were following you? At least 5, including Holcroft's foreman, a man named Jared. They're well armed and determined. Josiah conferred briefly with several of his men before announcing, We have 15 men capable of fighting, plus several women who can handle a rifle as well as any man. If they come here looking for a fight, they'll find one they didn't expect. Before they could discuss strategy further, a young man burst into the cabin. Riders coming down the ridge, Josiah, 6 of them, moving fast. Josiah immediately began issuing orders, sending the women and children to the far cabins while positioning his men around the perimeter of the settlement. Isaac was given a rifle which he checked with practiced hands. Stay inside, he told Briar. If things go badly, there's a back door. Run for the trees to the west and keep going. I'm not leaving without you, Briar protested. Isaac cupped her face in his hands. I need to know you're safe. Please, Briar, do this for me. The urgency in his voice convinced her. Briar nodded reluctantly, accepting a pistol from one of the women who had chosen to stay and fight. From her position by the window, Briar watched as Holcroft's men rode into the clearing, Jared at their lead. They reined in when confronted by the armed settlement residents arranged in defensive positions. We're looking for a man and a woman, Jared called out, his hand resting on his gun. The woman belongs to Vern Holcroft. The man is wanted for kidnapping and theft. Ain't seen nobody fitting that description, Josiah replied calmly from his position on the porch of the main cabin. This is private land you're on, mister. We don't take kindly to uninvited guests. Jared's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the armed residents. We know they came this way. Their tracks lead right to your settlement. Lots of people pass through these mountains, Josiah shrugged. Can't keep track of them all. You're harboring fugitives, Jared accused. That makes you accessories. Seems to me a woman can't be stolen if she doesn't belong to anyone in the first place, Josiah countered. Now, I suggest you turn around and ride out the way you came. Ain't nothing for you here but trouble. Jared conferred briefly with his men before fixing Josiah with a hard stare. We'll be back, old man, with more men, and next time we won't be asking so politely. You do what you feel you must, Josiah replied evenly. We'll be here. With visible reluctance, Jared signaled his men to retreat. They backed their horses out of the clearing, keeping their eyes on the armed residents until they were out of sight. They'll be back, Isaac said, joining Josiah on the porch as the sound of hoofbeats faded. I know, Josiah agreed, but not today and probably not tomorrow. It'll take them time to ride back to Holcroft's ranch and gather more men. That gives us time to prepare, Isaac said, or to leave if you prefer. This isn't your fight. Josiah clapped him on the shoulder. Any fight against men who think they can own other people is my fight, Isaac. You should know that by now. Inside, Briar paced anxiously, relieved that bloodshed had been avoided but knowing it was only a temporary reprieve. When Isaac rejoined her, she threw her arms around him, needing the reassurance of his solid presence. What now? She asked, pulling back to search his face. Now we plan, Isaac replied. Holcroft won't give up easily. He's a proud man and he's put a lot of money and pride into acquiring you. He doesn't care about me, Briar said bitterly. It's about winning, about showing everyone that Vern Holcroft always gets what he wants. Men like that are dangerous, Isaac agreed, but they also have weaknesses. They're so used to getting their way that they don't know how to handle opposition. That evening, as they shared a meal with the settlement residents, Isaac and Josiah discussed various strategies for dealing with Holcroft and his men when they returned. The direct approach rarely works with men like Holcroft, Isaac mused. They have too much money, too many men willing to do their dirty work. What about the law? One of Josiah's men suggested. Couldn't you appeal to a marshal or judge? Briar shook her head. Holcroft has most of the local law in his pocket. And technically, he has a signed contract from my father. A contract selling a human being shouldn't be worth the paper it's written on, Josiah growled. It shouldn't be, Isaac agreed, but out here, money talks louder than morality most times. So we fight, another man concluded. Or we find a different kind of leverage, Isaac said thoughtfully. Something Holcroft values more than his pride or his claim on Briar. Later, as they sat together on the porch of one of the smaller cabins that had been offered for their use, Isaac expanded on his thinking. Holcroft's power comes from his wealth and reputation, he explained. If we can threaten either of those, we might force him to back down. How? Briar asked, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I'm not sure yet, Isaac admitted. But every man has secrets, things he doesn't want others to know, even men like Holcroft. When I was at the ranch, Briar said slowly, a memory surfacing, I overheard Holcroft arguing with someone in his study. Something about cattle that didn't belong to him being moved across the border to Mexico. Isaac's eyes sharpened with interest. Rustling, that would certainly damage his reputation if it became known. I don't know for sure, Briar cautioned. I only heard bits and pieces. Still, it's worth investigating. Isaac rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I wonder if your cousin might have connections who could help us look into Holcroft's business dealings. She might, Briar agreed. Her husband knows many important people in Denver. Then that's our next step. We need to get word to your cousin. Josiah, joining them on the porch, offered a solution. I have a man who rides to Carson City every few weeks to trade. He's leaving tomorrow. He could carry a message to the telegraph office there. Plans were made for the morning, and when Briar finally retired to the small bedroom that had been prepared for her, she felt the first real stirrings of hope since her ordeal began. With Isaac's determination, Josiah's support, and potentially her cousin's resources, perhaps they could truly free her from Holcroft's claim. Isaac slept on a pallet in the main room of the cabin, close enough that Briar could hear his steady breathing through the thin wall. The sound comforted her, and despite the uncertainty of their situation, she slept more peacefully than she had in weeks. The next morning, Isaac composed a carefully worded message for Briar's cousin, explaining their situation and requesting any information that might be used as leverage against Holcroft. Josiah's man, a quiet, competent fellow named Samuel, promised to deliver it personally to the telegraph office in Carson City. It will take at least 3 days for him to reach Carson City, Josiah warned, and several more for a reply to come back, assuming your cousin acts immediately. We'll use that time to prepare, Isaac decided. Both for a fight if it comes to that, and for our next move if we get the information we need. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. During the daylight hours, Isaac worked with Josiah and his men, strengthening the settlement's defenses and training those less experienced in handling weapons. Briar, refusing to be idle, helped the women with their daily tasks and learned from them as well not just cooking and sewing, but also how to use a rifle effectively and treat wounds with limited supplies. In the evenings, Briar and Isaac would often sit together, talking about their lives before they met and cautiously exploring their growing feelings for each other. Isaac told her more about his years searching for his sister, the places he'd seen, the people he'd helped. Briar shared stories of her childhood, of her mother's gentle wisdom, and her dreams of someday having a place of her own where no one could tell her what to do or how to live. You still can have that, Isaac assured her one evening as they sat watching the sunset. Once Holcroft is dealt with, you can build whatever life you want. What about you? Briar asked, studying his profile in the fading light. What do you want? Isaac was silent for a long moment. I've been wandering for so long, I'm not sure I know how to stop, he admitted. But lately, I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots somewhere. Where would you go? Briar's heart beat faster as she waited for his answer. I don't know that it's about where, Isaac said, turning to meet her eyes. Maybe it's more about who you're with that makes a place worth staying. The days stretched into a week with no word from Carson City. Life in the settlement continued, but there was an underlying tension, an awareness that Holcroft and his men could return at any time with reinforcements. On the 8th day after Samuel's departure, a lookout spotted a lone rider approaching from the west. It wasn't Samuel, but a young man none of them recognized. He was admitted to the settlement warily, under armed guard. I have a message for Isaac Garrett and Briar Kate, the young man announced, producing a sealed envelope from his jacket. From Ellie Montgomery in Denver, I'm her husband's clerk. She sent me to find you after receiving your telegraph. Isaac took the envelope with barely contained anticipation. Inside was a letter and several official-looking documents. As he read, a slow smile spread across his face. Your cousin came through, Briar, he said, handing her the letter. She hired a Pinkerton detective who's been investigating Holcroft for months on behalf of another client. It seems Holcroft has been involved in more than just cattle rustling. He's been dealing in stolen army weapons, selling them to both sides in the border conflicts with Mexico. That's treason, Josiah observed, looking over the documents Isaac had passed to him. The army would hang him for that. Exactly, Isaac agreed. And your cousin has arranged for a federal marshal to meet us in Silver Creek with a warrant for Holcroft's arrest. All we have to do is get there. Silver Creek is 3 days' ride, the clerk supplied helpfully. The marshal will wait for you there until the end of the month. Then we leave tomorrow, Isaac decided. The sooner this is resolved, the better. That night, as they prepared for their journey, Briar found herself both excited and nervous. If all went as planned, she would soon be truly free of Holcroft's claim on her. But what then? Isaac, she said softly as he checked their supplies one final time, when this is over, what happens to us? Isaac set down the saddlebags he was packing and crossed to where she stood by the window. That depends on what you want, Briar. I want to be with you, she said simply, finding courage in the darkness. But I don't want to be a burden. You're used to moving freely, going wherever you're needed. I don't want to hold you back. Isaac took her hands in his. You could never be a burden, Briar. These past weeks, getting to know you, protecting you, they've been the most purposeful of my life. For years, I've been trying to fill a hole in my heart by saving others. But it wasn't until I met you that I realized what was really missing. What was that? Briar asked, her heart thundering in her chest. Someone to come home to, Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. Someone who makes all the wandering worth it because they're waiting at the end of the trail. Briar's eyes filled with tears as Isaac continued, I love you, Briar Kate. I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you in Holcroft's yard, with your head held high despite everything. And if you'll have me, I want to build that place you dream of somewhere that belongs to us both, where no one can tell either of us what to do or how to live. I love you too, Briar whispered, raising her hand to touch his face. And yes, I'll have you, Isaac Garrett, wherever we end up as long as we're together. Their kiss was a promise, sealing words that both had held back for too long. When they finally parted, Isaac pressed his forehead to hers. Let's finish this business with Holcroft first. Then we can start our life together proper. They left at dawn the next morning, supplied with fresh horses from Josiah's herd and enough provisions for the journey to Silver Creek. The entire settlement turned out to see them off, with Josiah stepping forward to clasp Isaac's hand firmly. You've always been welcome here, my friend, he said. And now so is your lady. Remember that if you ever need a place to lay low. Thank you, Isaac replied sincerely, for everything. The journey to Silver Creek was cautious but uneventful. They traveled mainly at night and rested during the day in concealed locations, wary of encountering Holcroft's men on the trail. Isaac was a patient teacher, showing Briar how to read the land, how to tell if someone had passed recently, how to move without leaving obvious signs of their presence. On the afternoon of the third day, they reached the outskirts of Silver Creek. The town had grown since Briar had last seen it, with several new buildings along the main street and more activity than she remembered. "We'll find the marshal first," Isaac decided as they observed the town from a ridgeline. "Your cousin's letter said he'd be staying at the Silver Dollar Hotel." They entered town separately to attract less attention. Isaac first, to locate the marshal, with Briar following an hour later. As arranged, they met behind the livery stable, where Isaac was waiting with a tall, stern-looking man wearing a marshal's badge. "Miss Kate," the marshal greeted her with a nod. "I'm Federal Marshal James Cooper. Your cousin's evidence against Holcroft is compelling, but I'd like to hear your account of your time at his ranch. Any details you can provide about his business dealings or associates would be helpful." For the next hour, Briar recounted everything she could remember about Holcroft's operation: the late-night meetings, the conversations she'd overheard, the strangers who came and went at odd hours. "That matches what our informants have told us," Marshal Cooper confirmed when she finished. "We've been building a case against Holcroft for months, but haven't been able to get close enough to gather direct evidence. Your testimony could be the key to finally bringing him down." "What's the plan?" Isaac asked. "I've got 4 deputies positioned around town," Cooper explained. "Holcroft comes to Silver Creek every Friday to conduct business at the bank and meet with associates at the saloon. Tomorrow's Friday. We'll take him then in public, where he'll have less opportunity to resist." "And if he does resist?" Briar asked, knowing Holcroft's violent tendencies. "Then he'll be dealt with accordingly," Cooper replied grimly. "But I'd prefer to take him alive to stand trial, make an example of him for others who think their money puts them above the law." They spent the night in separate rooms at a small boarding house on the edge of town, away from the main hotel where they might be recognized. Briar barely slept, alternating between hope that their ordeal would soon be over and fear that something would go wrong. Morning brought clear skies and a bustling Silver Creek, preparing for its weekly influx of ranchers and farmers coming to town for supplies and entertainment. Briar remained in her room as planned, while Isaac positioned himself across the street from the bank, where he could observe without being obvious. Shortly before noon, Marshal Cooper gave the signal Holcroft's distinctive carriage had been spotted approaching town. Isaac made his way to the boarding house to inform Briar. "He's here with Jared and 2 other men," Isaac reported. "Cooper wants us to stay out of sight until they've made the arrest. Once Holcroft is in custody, you'll be asked to make a formal statement." "I want to see it happen," Briar insisted, surprising herself with her determination. "I need to see him arrested, Isaac. I need to know it's really over." Isaac studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "All right. But we stay at a distance, and at the first sign of trouble you find cover. Promise me." "I promise," Briar agreed. They made their way to a position near the bank where they had a clear view of the street without being immediately visible. They didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, Holcroft's carriage pulled up, and the cattle baron himself stepped down, followed by Jared and the 2 other men Isaac had mentioned. Even at a distance, the sight of Holcroft made Briar's stomach clench with fear and anger. He looked exactly as she remembered, expensively dressed, confident to the point of arrogance, surveying the town as if he owned it. Marshal Cooper and his deputies moved into position as Holcroft made his way toward the bank entrance. The marshal stepped directly into his path, badge displayed prominently. "Vern Holcroft," Cooper's voice carried clearly in the suddenly quiet street. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of weapons trafficking, treason against the United States, and multiple counts of assault and unlawful imprisonment." Holcroft's reaction was immediate and predictable. "This is absurd," he blustered, looking around at the gathering crowd. "Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge for this, Cooper." "I know exactly who you are," Cooper replied evenly, "and what you've done." My deputies are positioned all around you. I suggest you come peacefully." For a moment it seemed Holcroft might comply. Then his eyes scanned the crowd and landed directly on Briar. His face contorted with rage. "You," he snarled. "You're behind this." Everything happened at once. Holcroft reached inside his coat. Garrett and the other men went for their weapons. Marshal Cooper shouted a warning. The first shots rang out. Isaac pushed Briar behind the corner of the building as bullets splintered the wood around them. The street erupted into chaos, with bystanders diving for cover and the air filled with gunfire. When the shooting stopped, an eerie silence descended. Briar peered cautiously around the corner to see Garrett and one of Holcroft's men lying motionless in the street. The third man was on his knees, hands raised in surrender. And Holcroft himself was slumped against the bank steps, clutching his shoulder, his face pale with pain and fury as Marshal Cooper stood over him, revolver still trained on his chest. "It's over," Isaac murmured, his arm around Briar's waist, and it was. Holcroft and his surviving man were taken into custody. Marshal Cooper's deputies had suffered only minor injuries. And as word spread about the charges against Holcroft, other witnesses came forward with accounts of his crimes, ensuring that even his considerable wealth wouldn't save him from justice. 2 days later, after giving their formal statements to Marshal Cooper and sending a telegraph to Briar's cousin with news of Holcroft's arrest, Briar and Isaac stood together at the stagecoach station. "Denver?" the ticket agent asked as Isaac approached the counter. Isaac glanced back at Briar, a question in his eyes. "No," Briar said decisively. "Not Denver." She stepped forward, linking her arm with Isaac's. "Where would you go if you could go anywhere?" Isaac considered for a moment. "There's land for sale up north near the Wyoming border. Good grazing, plenty of water far from here. I rode through there last year and thought it might be a fine place to settle someday." "Then that's where we'll go," Briar decided, "to see this land of yours." "Our land," Isaac corrected, his smile warming her to her toes. "If you like it." "I'm sure I will," Briar replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "As long as we're together." They were married in a small ceremony in the next town they reached, with a kindly preacher and his wife as witnesses. The journey north took several weeks, but Briar found she enjoyed the traveling now that it was by choice rather than necessity. Isaac taught her more about surviving in the wilderness, while she shared her knowledge of plants and cooking. They made plans as they rode, discussing the kind of home they would build, the animals they would raise, the life they would share. The land, when they finally reached it, was everything Isaac had described: a verdant valley nestled between protective ridges, with a clear stream running through it, and enough flat ground for both grazing and crops. The nearest town was a day's ride away, close enough for supplies but far enough for privacy. "What do you think?" Isaac asked as they surveyed what could be their future home. Briar took in the sweeping vista, imagining a cabin by the stream, horses in the meadow, perhaps children playing in the yard someday. She turned to the man beside her, the man who had risked everything to save her, who had shown her what it meant to be truly valued, truly loved. "It's perfect," she said, reaching for his hand. "Let's build our home." And they did. Over the next year they constructed a sturdy cabin, established a small herd of cattle, and planted their first crops. Word reached them that Holcroft had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. His empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. Briar's cousin Ellie visited that summer, bringing news from the outside world and gifts for their home. She marveled at the transformation in her once shy cousin, now confidently managing a growing homestead alongside her husband. "Are you happy here?" Ellie asked as they sat on the porch watching Isaac mend a fence in the distance. "So far from everything." Briar smiled, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly, a secret she and Isaac had only just confirmed and hadn't shared with anyone else yet. "I'm not far from everything," she replied. "I'm exactly where I belong." In the years that followed, the Garrett homestead prospered and grew. Isaac's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman brought customers from miles around. Briar established a garden that produced not only food for their table but medicinal herbs that she used to help neighbors and travelers in need. Their first child, a daughter they named Hope, arrived on a snowy December night with Ellie, visiting again, acting as midwife. 2 years later, a son they called Daniel joined the family. Both children grew strong and capable in the clean mountain air, learning from their parents the values of hard work, honesty, and standing up for what was right. Occasionally, Isaac would still answer a call for help someone unjustly imprisoned, a child taken, a person needing to disappear and start anew. But he always returned to the home and family that anchored him, to the woman who had taught him that saving others wasn't enough if you couldn't also save yourself. On their 10th anniversary, as they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in the yard with the dog, Briar turned to Isaac with a smile. "Did you ever imagine, that day you saw me in Holcroft's yard, that we'd end up here?" she asked. Isaac pulled her close, his arms still strong, his eyes still as blue as the summer sky overhead. "I didn't dare hope for this much happiness," he admitted, "but I knew even then that you were worth fighting for. And I knew, even though I was afraid to admit it, that you were the one who would set me free," Briar replied, stretching up to kiss the man who had fought for her, saved her, and loved her, the man with whom she had built a life of true freedom and joy.